So we also wanted to make sure we incorporated a national perspective to the agenda, see what other states have been up to. And we had Waldo Jakit, who's a digital delivery manager at U.S. Digital Response, originally planned to be here in person. He had a schedule conflict. Instead, we're going to hear from Anthony Flores, who's presenting on his behalf. He is the Research and Data Director for the Oklahoma Policy Institute. Looks like his PowerPoint's on deck and his microphone is live. So with that, Anthony, you are recognized.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Flores, Research Director for Oklahoma Policy Institute. Like Representative Pay said, I am filling in for Waldo Jakith. Waldo Jakith is one of the foremost experts on government software procurement in the country, which unfortunately means he's very popular. So he's double booked presenting to the American Bar Association as I speak. But he was very fortunate to let me, or I was very fortunate to have him let me steal all of his slides. So that's what I'm going to be presenting today. I also want to thank Representative Lawson and Senator Seafried for their work in getting this bill passed, as well as Representative Pay and Representative Geist for recommending the study. I want to thank the agency for the time and information they shared today. They have consistently proven themselves to be excellent public servants. As I walk through the national best practices for large IT projects, I don't want folks to assume that I'm saying that we aren't doing any of those practices. In fact, national experts I've invited to meet with their agencies have repeatedly said that many of the practices they usually have to spend time convincing agencies to adopt are already being done here, or are met with openness to learn and improve, and that's rare. And that's something that Oklahoma can be proud of. I think you'll see that some of the things actually that we heard presented today from Brendan and Stephen are going to be echoed in this. Now, most of what I know about software procurement, I learned from Waldo and his peers. So anything that you hear intelligent is him, not me in this. So a bit about Waldo's background. He has worked as a career software developer, served in the General Service Administration at TANF, where he worked directly with federal, state, and local governments. As a technology fixer, he presented at many state legislatures, National Association of State Chief Information Officers, State Procurement Officers, Medicaid Directors, Council of State Governments. You kind of get the point. A bit about myself. I lead the OK Policies Research and Data team. We focus on improving the data and IT infrastructure for Oklahoma. We focus primarily on criminal justice data, where we've dealt with many issues we talked about today. Data that is siloed or messy, antiquated data systems, complex data sharing agreements, making sure there's compliance with state and federal law and data privacy protections. I think that what we've done to improve the accessibility and usability of criminal justice data for city, county, and state governments is going to be a model for other states to follow. But specifically, why am I talking about this topic today? I think it's because with technology, it's easy to find ourselves buried a little bit within buzzwords or lingo, and you feel disempowered to make decisions about how to budget software projects. So usually Waldo and his team take one day to teach people the basic concepts you need to understand in order to budget and procure software effectively. Our goal is going to be to do that in about 10 minutes, so it's going to be pretty interesting. This presentation will give you the tools you need to ask the right questions and be able to reduce the risk of big IT and software projects going the wrong way. But first, I want to talk about why you should care with a real example of what can go wrong in other states. So Rhode Island in 2013 contracted Deloitte for their integrated benefit application and followed none of these best practices. And the consequences of failure were pretty real. The price tag went from $100 million to $364. At launch, thousands of people lost their health benefits, and several people probably died as a result of losing those benefits. Many benefits were overpaid or underpaid, which caused tens of millions in federal fines. Because the state outsourced a lot of their technical know-how, they had no choice but to stay with the Deloitte for another $99 million contract. And things have not gotten better. 10 months ago, Deloitte's system was hacked and half the state's residents' data was held ransom. Deloitte tried to blame the state. That didn't really hold up since they kind of did everything and is now paying millions as a result. Now in 2025, Rhode Island is planning to modernize what in 2016 was the new modern system and move away from Deloitte. I'm not trying to single out Rhode Island and Deloitte in this example. Every state has dozens of stories like this from the usual vendors who get these contracts, and everyone followed the rules and norms for software procurement in government. All of this is perfectly normal, and this is just how normal it is. One report by the Standish Group found that all government software development contracts over $6 million, only 11% are successful, defined as being within 20% of cost, schedule, and performance. Another study by the Department of Defense, which procures quite a lot of software, found that 40% of systems developed, representing over $35 billion of DoD spending, failed to meet real needs, even when they met the contractual requirements. That means even when you get a report saying that on paper, everything the vendor promised was delivered, you're still not necessarily guaranteed to get something that people actually need. A third study looking at over 5,300 IT projects found the average government IT project costs around 310% of the originally estimated price. Again, this is all perfectly normal, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So as I mentioned, we're going to do something fun. We're going to make you all software project budgeting procurement experts in just 10 minutes. And we're not going to do anything new to do that in the private sector. I think I heard you mention that earlier, and our friends at Google can attest. This is all perfectly normal and boring. Dozens of state and federal agencies are adopting these practices recommended by Waldo and his peers to great effect. Not only is it proving to be crucial differences between the projects that fail and those that succeed, but their staff love it and want to do more of it. So here are the 5 signs that a software project is set up to succeed, and we're going to go through them one by one. One is human-centered design. We've heard that echoed a lot today. Agile software development, product ownership, building out a loosely coupled parts, and the procurement approach that will allow all of this, which is modular contracting. So 1, human-centered design. First, what is design? There's a quote from a Facebook employee who's a product designer, who said designing is deciding how a thing should be. So it's not just like what color or what font to use or some special flourish. It's deciding every detail of what you're building. To our friends at Google, you may want to cover your ears for this next part, but an iPhone, I think, is an example of great design. I mean, Google Pixel's really good too, but a 2-year-old could start using this without even being able to read. It took teams of user researchers who designed it, who tested it with real users and saw all the weird ways that people use it and how to guide them back on the right path. Great software companies have teams of user researchers who do that. Agencies and vendors should have them as well. Now, human-centered design is pretty simple. It's hard, but it's simple. It says that all the work that's done needs to be centered on satisfying the needs of end users of the software, that it was tested with them every step of the way. Everyone here knows what human-centered design is. It's when you use something for the first time and it's so easy that it feels like magic. Bad human-centered design is when you feel like you need to fight the machine to get it to do what you want. So how do you actually do that in practice? 1, work is performed only if those actual end users approved it, or it's in service of their identified needs. 2, the work isn't finished until the users say that it is. 3, you do what the actual relevant humans needs and not what the organization thinks that they need, and that's it. If you don't design with real people, you're designing for imaginary people. For an integrated benefit application, the primary users are state employees, like case managers, that need to quickly be able to process applications. That means higher job satisfaction, retention, easier onboarding, and better outcomes for people. Local benefit navigators, helping people apply for benefits, and busy working Oklahomans applying for these programs. The easier it is for them, the more people that it can help. And of course, just anyone in the public that wants to apply for these benefits. So what does user research look like? It kind of just looks like this slide. It's watching people, not a QA tester, but like a real person, narrate out loud as they use the system, seeing what buttons make them confused, what makes them curse out loud, what makes them just give up, then deciding that that pain is what you're going to fix, fixing it, then verifying with them that it fixed their problem. You don't just say mission accomplished. The work isn't done until they say that it's done. So user research helps human-centered design by ensuring that the vendor is working on the actual needs of users and that the system will do what you need it to do. A vendor should have a user researcher on staff working side by side with the programmers. That's what enables that tight feedback loop. If they're on different organizations or different teams, then the feedback loop is just not as tight. So again, this is a hypothetical. Sevilla and some human-centered design experts worked with Michigan DHS to improve the paper application. At the time, Michigan had the longest paper application in the country at 40 pages. Through human-centered design principles of interviewing users of the application, case managers, agency heads, they cut down that application to 8 pages, and the processing time went down by 50%. The human-centered design should not just be used for government services, not just digital services, but all government services as much as possible. So I promise these are going to get shorter as I'm going. Agile software development is a common buzzword, but it's real simple. It's used by 89% of professional software developers in the private sector. It's growing popularity in government, including in Oklahoma, but it's not universally applied. So what is Agile? Let's contrast it with what it's not. Agile is not waterfall software development, which is how many government projects are done. This is where a consultant comes up with a list of requirements, usually from really detailed legislation, which go into an RFP, then a contract is awarded. Those requirements go to some designer who designs screens, programmers write code to implement those designs. Then someone tries to verify that each requirement in the contract is satisfied by some requirement traceability matrix to show the work has been met. And then it goes into some kind of maintenance phase. As we saw in the DoD study, these projects go over budget and fail to meet the needs of the people using the software because they verified if it worked for the contract, not the people who use it. And because every contract requirement was met, the only way to fix that is giving the vendor an infusion of more money. This is contract-centered design, not human-centered design. So Agile says instead of planning a multi-year project in great detail with every step over the whole time, you instead just know the general objective of the project. We're going to create an integrated benefit system. We're going to reduce the snap error rate. We're going to implement work requirements. Then the vendor builds something small to build towards that objective in 2 weeks. Not 3 years, but 2 weeks. No excuses, fully tested, fully documented, ready to be used, even if it doesn't look that pretty. And then after 2 weeks, government and the users can inspect the work of that vendor team. They test it with the intended users to verify that they like it and that it's making their life better. And from what they learn from that, they go back and make a plan for what to do for the next 2 weeks. Then they just repeat this. In this way, value is delivered constantly until the software gets good enough to be used broadly by an actual end users. And then you keep delivering value every 2 weeks until you run out of money or all the work is done, whichever comes first. In this approach, government owns all the software, the vendor owns nothing. You wouldn't buy a car where you can't look at the engine. Why would you buy software that you can't maintain or modify? And if in 3 months into the contract, the vendor turns out to be bad, well, everyone knows it very quickly, and you just fire them. And then you hire someone else to pick up where they left off rather than starting all the way over. And you can do that because you have that documented code. And we can be confident that someone else can pick it up because of all that. In a bit, we'll talk about some of those changes to procurement you need to be able to actually do that, though. It also gives you as lawmakers and agencies tight contract oversight over vendor activities so you know what you're getting your money's worth. It's how the whole software industry works, and at any point, legislative staff can join a demonstration to see how things are going. Again, to software developers, this is totally normal. So how to apply this to the integrated benefit system? You can require developers to allow demonstrations of the software at least every 2 weeks to government and users. You could do it every day if you really wanted to. Usually people have other things to do. HB 1575 is a feasibility study, but that doesn't mean that it only has to be a report, although at some point you should probably do that. It can be a working prototype of the WIC integration or the Medicaid integration using fake data, so you don't have to worry about those privacy concerns just yet, and prove that that data can flow however you need it to. And then you can worry about the questions about the data sharing agreements to get that real data actually flowing, but that part isn't hypothetical. Then we know it can happen. Vendors love that reduced uncertainty because it's going to lower the price of the project. That part is just basic economics. New features should be tested with real users of the software to verify it meets their needs. All right, this one's pretty fast. Product ownership. It's central to Agile. It just says that someone has to be in charge of the development team, and that has to be one person. It has to be one person because you need to make sure that that person has the accountability to know that they're building the right thing and that meets the needs of real people, not just that they're building it the right way. This is not other duties that's assigned for big projects. This should be as close as possible to a full-time position, so 0.8 to 1 FTE. The product owner should be an agency employee from the agency procuring this work. That employee should be empowered to represent the government and the needs of end users when talking to the vendor. So God help you if you outsource this to the vendor because now they have complete control over you. For the full project, that may not be the feasibility study. So that means that if whoever, DHS procures the software, OCA procures the software, the product owner should be at whichever agency that is. It should be someone with deep knowledge of their benefits and user needs, and preferably of the benefits and user needs of the agencies whose benefits are being integrated. So next component is building with loosely coupled parts. I'm going to skip a section just to save you all some time. Large software projects are doomed to fail. They collapse under the weight of their own administrations and then must be broken down into a series of smaller, mostly independent projects. Your new system will eventually be your old system. Each one of these components communicates with each other through simple modular standards so they can be swapped out at any time. In this way, you don't build a monolith that everyone will hate in 5 years. You build a little ecosystem in which each piece can be upgraded and modified easily as changing needs will always demand. You heard a little bit about this in that ecosystem. This is how shipping containers work. The shipping company is able to load and swap out shipping containers without having to care about the messy details of what the cargo is like inside. APIs, another important bit of jargon, are like these shipping containers but for data. They help move data from one system to another without having to worry about the messy details of how each data system works. In this way, multiple teams or multiple vendors can work simultaneously on a system with minimal coordination. There's no technical need to award a single contract for a large project. And digital service delivery is not going away. In government, it's going to continue growing, so you should budget for it accordingly as an ongoing operational expense and not a one-time capital expense. These are ongoing, never-ending tools that are constantly improving based on changing user needs, feedbacks, and laws, and we should budget for that accordingly. For an integrated benefit system, this means that every benefit integrated should be a separate project. You don't have to do everything at once. APIs let you do things like, for an integrated benefit system, we don't necessarily have to move all of OCA or OSDH's like complex rule engines to OKDHS. You can have an API connected to the application that securely ships that applicant's relevant info to their system. Their system uses that data as if it came from apply.okhaca.gov and decide if they're eligible. OKDHS doesn't have to know the details of how. And then the applicant's eligibility is shipped back via the API to OKDHS. Or you can ship it to an API at OHMs in the middle. Like all those details actually aren't too important. As long as, well, the important caveat here is just that you need to make sure that those data sharing agreements are in place for that. So the final component now is you putting all the pieces together is modular contracting. By employing all these techniques, you can break down your large, huge, risky contract into a handful of safe, smaller contracts. There's two principles to know here is that one, the more you spend, the greater odds of failure. So just don't do that. Just break up the contract. So number two is keep the cost of, keep the period of performance short, no longer than 3 calendar years, including options. That same report from the Standish Group showed that basically after 3 years, the possibility of success is virtually zero. So just avoid doing that. So this is the agile acquisition approach that you get there, is that you can then have a series of contract modules that you put out an RFP for in succession, and they can be overlapping even. So this part is about how to budget these projects. So one team of 5 to 9 software developers, user researchers, and project managers here in Oklahoma costs about $1 to $2 million a year. Kind of depends where you live. If you pay for a developer in an expensive city, you're going to pay double or triple the cost just paying the rent. So when possible, local is better. Also because they understand the needs of the users. They probably have been users before. And of course, sometimes that's not possible. So you have to look elsewhere. But preferably, if you can, you would get it here. So the real question you need to ask yourself whenever you're trying to get a budget, you don't even need a big fiscal impact estimate to get this. It's just how many teams do we need and for how long? Say each team is $1 million a year and you need them for 2 years. Well, that's $2 million. You need them for 6 months. It's going to be 500,000. Did I just turn off the, okay. So the final thing I'm just going to end on is, let's say you wanted to ignore all this and really your goal was just to fail at one of these software projects. What would you do? Well, one, you wouldn't conduct user research. You would just build up a long list of requirements up front. You would sign a $10 million contract with a single vendor. You would conduct oversight via reports. God forbid you actually looked at the software before to see what you were getting. And then, of course, you would punish projects that fail fast. You wouldn't reward people who take a risk and try to make sure that they're actually respecting taxpayers' money. So what are some executive actions that could be taken to incorporate all this information? Some executive actions are to require demos, not memos. Limit those contracts to 10 to 15 million in 3 years. Require user research for products over $1 million. If you're going to pay over $1 million, you probably want to verify that it's actually meeting some user's real need. And you want to require a named and empowered product owner for all of these projects. Some legislative actions that can be taken, you can require twice monthly demos to legislative staff. You don't necessarily have to actually attend each one of those demos, but it's good to have that as an option for to have that kind of oversight. You can create a state digital service. It's really good to have that, as we saw with the Deloitte example, that tech expertise within government. And sometimes that can be hard to hire an FTE just within each agency. So if you had a central agency like OHMs, you can create a digital service office there that can kind of help with different projects at different agencies. Also, allocating funding operationally as opposed to as a capital expense, as we saw earlier. I've attached an email that's going to be for everyone to get from the De-risking Government Technology Guide whenever Waldo was at the General Services Administration. That kind of goes into all the things I just did in about 10 minutes, but in far more detail. And of course, you can always contact Waldo Jakeith directly. He is grant funded to talk and consult for government for free on these technology projects. So especially with RFP drafting, vendor acquisition. They also have teams of user researchers. I've talked with Cindy Fan. She used to work with the Department of Labor as a user research lead, and she's willing to offer herself on a couple user research sprints if that's needed for anybody. With that said, that's my presentation. I did want to say that I'm just really grateful for this conversation here today and that people are having this conversation because it's been needed for a long time. Thank you.